Steve, Frank, thank you for sitting down and talking. We're in the BP Design Theater here at the College of Business and Security Management, and you were a business major and graduate. Does it look a little different than when you were here?
Oh yeah, it's a lot different. We had most of our classes over in the Greening building. So this is totally different. This is a beautiful new facility, and I'm certainly happy that it's here for the students.
Yeah. Now, I want to point out that not only are you a UAF grad, but your dad graduated from the school too in engineering, right? Civil engineering. What brought him to Fairbanks? Because he isn't originally from Fairbanks, is he?
No, he was originally born in Canada, in Alberta, southern Alberta, and he had some family friends, and so after he got out of high school, he went down to Ellensburg, Washington, and started school there at Central Washington. And he got drafted, I think, into the Army. And so he had gotten some more schooling in the Army. I think it was University of North Dakota or South Dakota, or one of the Dakotas, I think. And then somewhere along the line, he got the impression, he told me this story, he said, some of his childhood friends had a brother that had attended University of Alaska, and that it was a pretty skookum place. And I remember him using that word, skookum, yeah. And so somehow that put in his mind that he wanted to come north to Alaska. He wanted to get a degree in engineering from the beginning, he told me. And he had also worked for the Canadian Steamship Company. I think it was attached to the Canadian Railway System. They had something akin to our Alaska Steamship Company that did ply the waters of the southeastern Alaska. So one year he came up all the way through the Panhandle, and so he got a little taste of Alaska from that standpoint too. But anyway, yeah, he and my mother came up in 1946 on the train. They would take the Alaska, I think it was the Alaska Steamship, to Seward, and then from Seward they would get on the train and come to Fairbanks by train, and that's how they arrived in 46.
Now, your mom is a graduate from the University of Washington, and I have to ask you, it sounds like education was important in your family. Do I have that right?
I think so. I was not a very good student when I was young. I was the last of 5 children. I think, my parents were probably tiring of parenting by then, and so I was kind of I was a basketball player, and I didn't pay much attention to school until I got towards the end of my senior year, or towards the end of my high school career. In my senior year, I started paying attention to, well, maybe I better start getting some grades, and what's my future going to be, that sort of thing. And I had some really good teachers at Lathrop that did help to inspire me. One in particular, Francine Mears, is still here in Fairbanks, and she inspired me. She had a class in literature that just opened my eyes to reading and what literature could mean, to an individual. And so I've always thanked her for inspiring me to read. And she's still here. She taught at Lathrop for many years, and I think she went to West Valley maybe, and when they formed West Valley. And then she taught over at Monroe. After she retired from the public school system, she taught at Monroe for many years, and she's still here.
Okay, we're going to get to your high school, but I just want to, your dad got his degree, but while he's getting his degree, he's also building houses, and he formed a concrete block manufacturing thing?
Yes, yeah, he was kind of entrepreneurial, in a quiet, conservative way. He had several war buddies. He got to know some guys in the Army, and they became lifelong friends. In fact, one of his war buddies married his sister, so he became my uncle. So anyway, about 3 of them came up with him, I think, and one of them, his future brother-in-law, and he and his brother-in-law's father started building houses in South Fairbanks back in those days, and it would have been probably 47, 48. And so they did that for a few years, and so my dad didn't go to school every semester. I think he took one semester off, but he eventually he graduated in '49. I know that, with a degree in civil engineering, and so yeah, it was the beginning of his entrepreneurial career too. I think he also at that time he formed a partnership with another local guy named Walker, Ed Walker, and Ed's son became governor, Bill.
Yeah, Bill Walker.
So Bill grew up here, and his dad and my dad were partners in a little company called the Arctic Block Company, and they made concrete blocks, and they also did concrete work. Apparently, this is just what I've heard. I have no memory of it, other than I remember seeing an old truck that said Arctic Block on the side. But anyway, so I don't know how long that lasted. I don't think it lasted very long, but it was one of his many things. And then he worked for the city as a city engineer for a time. And then he went to work for a guy named Ed Caraway and at Fairbanks Builders. This guy had Fairbanks Builders, and he worked there until '58 when he joined Gem Company, where there was a lot of partners in Gem Company, and the first initial of their last names make up the name Gem Company. There was Garrity, Erickson, Mitchell, Marlin, and Hefflinger was the H. And Mr. Hefflinger, he left to go mining. He left the company. My dad kind of took his place, but they didn't change the name. Just left it Gem Company, and so that's how he got started with them in '58, I think it was.
Mm-hmm. And I want to talk about your mom for a minute, because she was instrumental in a number of organizations and a staunch Republican.
Yeah, I don't know if she was a staunch Republican, but she was definitely a Republican. It was a time when I just remember she would be a little more partisan than my dad. My dad was conservative and probably always voted Republican, but he didn't talk about it as much as my mom. She was a Republican, and she was proud of it. So.
But she was instrumental in the symphony and other organizations as well.
Yeah, she took up. She played violin as a young person, and then didn't come back to it for 20 years or more. When she was apparently she was a founding member of the Fairbanks University Symphony. Forgot the exact name of it, and I don't even know what year that was. But my sister told me she was a founding member, so I know she was very into it. We used to have to go to her concerts and that sort of thing. That was always a little laborious to go to those concerts. But yeah, it was a big thing for her. She enjoyed it. She was also active in I think it's the AAUW, which is an organization of university women. So she definitely, was proud of her education, and it was important to her to be supportive of the university and that sort of thing too.
Well, as a future business leader and somebody who's civically engaged, I see the imprint of your parents' influence on your future.
Yeah, for sure. My dad, he served in an elective office as a member of the Public Utilities Board back in the 60s probably. The city owned the utilities before they sold them, and there was a publicly elected utilities board, and he was on that for a number of years. I'm not sure how long, but yeah.
Yeah, so you must have picked up some influence there. Well, all right, before I get to Lathrop, though, I do want to ask you, in your lifetime, you were born in a territory and it became a state.
Yeah.
Any memories of that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I like to think my memory goes back to at least when I was 5. I tell people that I started my paper route when I was 5. I believe it. Some people don't. My wife doesn't believe it, but I think it's true.
I think they had child labor
laws.
Well,
they did, but my brother, you see, my brother had the paper route, and he tired of it very quickly. So he gave it to me and my sisters. And so we started very, very young with doing our paper route. So I can remember taking our, used to have do you remember the Progress Edition? We used to have the Progress Edition, and then we had the other one, during golden days, there was one called, I forgot what it was, another big, thick one. But we used to have to get a sled out to haul this. So the Progress edition came in the spring, and the other one came in the summer, I think. But anyway, we used to have to take our sled out to pile up the Progress edition because we had about 40 papers.
Wow.
And we split it up though. I started out only having the small area that had 15 when I was starting out, but later I guess I had to do all 40 papers.
You expanded.
Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I remember, that time, and I have a distinct memory of seeing a 59 penny, with 1959 on it and associating that with statehood. Now that may be a bad memory, or something, but I was born in 54, so I would have been around 5 or so at that time. And so yeah, I can remember that pretty vaguely, but I remember that a little bit. I remember distinctly the 1960 presidential election. I remember it being in first grade, and my mother was a supporter.
Nixon and Kennedy?
It was Nixon and Kennedy, and my mother was definitely a Nixon supporter at that time. And then I remember she had, in 64, that was Goldwater, and she had there was a little tiny elephant with big horn-rimmed glasses, because he wore those horn-rimmed glasses when they weren't popular anymore. But anyway, it was interesting.
And finally, before Lathrop, you were around for the flood. Your family was around for the flood. How did it impact them?
Well, much like most people that lived in downtown Fairbanks, we got flooded. Our house, the basement was entirely flooded, and my dad built this house in 55, the upstairs in 55. I think he started it in 54, and so, me and my brothers had our bedrooms downstairs, and then my sisters had their bedroom, and my parents had their bedrooms upstairs. So we lived in the downstairs and the upstairs, and the downstairs was entirely flooded, and then I think we got about 6 inches of water in our top floor. So our top floor wasn't that bad, but one of my sisters, my sister Mary, and I got to fly out to Seattle. So we missed the cleanup. My other sister, my other sister Andrea had to stay here and work on the cleanup, and I guess we had about a foot of mud in the basement, which is pretty common.
Yeah.
I know. My dad is an engineer, or was an engineer, and I remember we were kind of fighting hard with sandbags and stuff to try to keep the water from going down the stairwell and flooding our basement as the water was rising. And all the experts were saying, the water's going to crash, the water's going to crash. And, it kind of kept coming up. Anyway, my dad came home, and, in the middle of the day, and us kids are fighting this water, and my dad says, let it go, let it go in there, because he knew that if you didn't let the water go in, it would collapse your basement. So
pressure.
Yeah, the water pressure would collapse it. So he said, just don't worry about it, guys, just let it go. And so he had to clean it up. So he and my sister anyway.
Well, I'll bet, yeah. Well, it's such a vivid memory for so many Fairbanksans.
Yeah, it was. It was a big time. It was, I remember there was a sign down in one of the buildings, and I forgot the guy's name, but Ross was part of it. He said, come hell or high water, Fairbanks is here to stay, and it was a spirit, that we were going to recover from this thing.
Yeah.
And we did as a community, and I'm sure we got a lot of relief from federal and state funds to do so, but we did rebuild, and there was a good spirit, around that time.
Well, it seems those kind of adverse moments build a community in many ways.
They do.
And share a hardship.
That. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Lathrop, I don't know if it was a hardship, but there was a lot of triumph there for a basketball player. Before we talk about Lathrop's winning season, when did you start playing basketball? You grew up with it, didn't you?
Yeah, I really did. My brother Randy was a basketball player, and he's 7 years older than I am. So I think at some point, I know even in grade school, I was very active in basketball and played a lot. We didn't have a basketball team at Denali because our principal didn't believe in inter-school sports, so we didn't get to have a team. Other schools had a team, but we didn't. But ironically, of our starting players on the championship team, 3 of us were from Denali, even though we didn't have a team there. But anyway, yeah, so I played a lot there in grade school, and then really in junior high, I quit my paper route so I could play junior high basketball in 7th grade. And so I played 7th grade and 8th grade and then on into high school.
Well, and it was a championship season for Lathrop. It won the state championship. Tell me, what memories do you have, and why do you think it was just so successful?
Well, basketball was a really huge part of my life. I mean, it was almost my entire life, at that time. And it was for the rest of us, our teammates. We played basketball all year round. Whenever we could find a gym to play in or outside on the outside courts, we played all the time. And so, yeah, it was a big deal. And we had a good coach, Claire Markey, came to Fairbanks to coach from Juneau. He had been a successful coach in Juneau and won the state championship in Juneau in 1969 against Lathrop. I remember they came up, the Juneau team did come up and beat Lathrop on Lathrop's home court in '69. So we had the best team. Lathrop had the best team in Western Alaska. That's all of Alaska besides Southeastern. So they used to separate it between Southeastern and then Western Alaska was everything north of Southeastern. So Anchorage, Kenai, everything, all the way up. And so there was a 3-game playoff between the winner of Southeastern and what they called Western Alaska. I don't know that we'd call it Western Alaska today.
I don't
we'd
think
call it
so.
something else,
yeah.
But that's what they called it then. And so anyway, we had a great season. We only lost 1 game to Eielson, and Ted DeLeon, who's a famous Fairbanks and coach, he always reminds us, he's still here. and one of his top players, Shane McAfee, is still here too. And they always remind us that, they beat us in that one. That was our only loss, I think, against Eielson. But anyway, so yeah, we had a great season. And I'm sure we had some good luck along the way. I know we had some good luck because we almost got beat by West High School in a very close game down in Anchorage. But Pat Miller, one of our starting guards, he pulled it out at the end. He made a couple of good shots at the end and saved us from losing that game. But
before getting you to college and another championship season, I do want to ask you, years later, you were roped into being the coach for Monroe, the Monroe Rams, and they also went to state championships and won. So tell me about that.
Okay, yeah, that was another tremendous experience for me. It was a lot of fun. There's a local attorney named Ed Murdy's that still has kids in Fairbanks. I think Ward, a lot of people know Ward, I'm sure. Anyway, he was very prominent with youth athletics, a real promoter, and did a lot of good for, promoting athletics for youth. And I didn't know Ed really well, but he was his family was Catholic, and he went to, his kids went to Monroe, most of them. And one time he told me, Steve, he says, you need to go talk to the principal over there at Monroe about being coach. So I said, oh, okay. I was 23, I think, at the time, or 24 maybe. And so I was working at Bank of the North, and, had a day job, but I was going to, instead of being a teacher and a coach, I was just going to be a coach, So anyway, I went and talked to the principal, and somehow I got the job to be the coach over there. Plus, they made me be the athletic director too, so I had those administrative responsibilities that first year. Ooh. That was just for the first year, but anyway. So yeah, the team. The prior year, the team had won the state championship, and this is little old Monroe beating all the big schools in the state. They were lumped in with the top schools at that time. And so they had won, but the coach moved on or something, so they needed a new coach. And I became the coach, and I immediately asked my friend Mike Scanlon, who was a Lathrop standout in the '64 championship team with Gary Wilkin and those guys. Anyway, I asked Mike to be my assistant, and that was a great decision because he helped, guide us along the way. And so, yeah, we had 5 great players that had, most of whom had played the previous year, and so they had the experience, in the pressure of a championship basketball. And yeah, we had a great season. I think we only lost a couple of games, or maybe 1 or 2, I can't remember. But I know we got beat once by East High School, who may have been the best team, in the state that year. But ironically, we got to go to state tournament, and also West Valley from Fairbanks got to go because the top 2 teams from each region got to go. And we had beaten West Valley already in the season 4 times. 3 times during the normal season, during the regular season, and once in our regional championship. And so we were paired in opposite brackets from East, and West Valley was paired with East, and they beat East in the semifinals. So we didn't have to face East, and East had thoroughly beaten us earlier that year. And so it was us and West Valley for the state championship. We had the tournament down at Mount Edgecombe in Sitka, in a big gym down there. And so lo and behold, we beat West Valley for the 5th time and for the state championship in 1980. It was a wonderful year.
That must have hurt them.
It had to be tough for West Valley, but it was wonderful for us.
I'm sure it was
great. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious. One last question about coaching. Often you hear how important the skills for a coach are in leadership, and that seems obvious. But can they be applied more broadly, do you think, Steve? Do what you learned as a coach help you at all when you later became a lawmaker and a public figure?
Yeah, I think there's certainly something that, something you learn, anything you learn, you can apply to something else, And so, yeah, I think that, what did I learn as a coach? I think I learned to listen to my players. I remember my favorite story is a story about being unprepared as a coach for a game we were in early in that first season where we were needing to have a press, because we were behind, and I didn't know what to do because we hadn't worked on one, because I didn't think we'd need one. And so I thought, okay, I'll ask Jim Berglund, one of our players. I'll ask him what they did last year. And so I pulled him out of the game, sat him down, and said, Jimmy, what did you guys do last year for a press? He said, okay, we ran a 1-2-1-1. And this is what we did, And I said, okay, great. Where would you put everybody? He said, okay, I'd have him here and him here. And so anyway, I said, so I called the timeout. I said, okay, guys, this is what we're going to do. I followed Jim's instructions, and it worked like a champ. These guys knew what to do. It wasn't any of my doing. It was them knowing what to do. And so I learned to listen. That was a good example of learning to listen. And I think that's important, in management, in anything, and particularly in politics. You got to listen. You got to listen to your constituents. You got to listen to what, the other people around the state need for their constituents. And you have to be, I think, empathetic to, what it takes to live, together as a people, and you got to compromise, and you have to help each other, kind of work out what will work for them.
Yeah. Okay, let's get you back. You've just had that was your senior year that you won the state championship at Lathrop. Did you have scholarships waiting for you? How did that play out when you decided to go to college?
Well, I always knew, at least for the last few years, I wanted to play basketball in college because that's kind of what I was, a basketball player. So And then as I got closer to the end of my senior year, I started thinking, okay, I'm probably not going to be a pro, so you better start thinking about, an education. And somewhere along the line there, I got to thinking, I don't want to just be viewed as a dumb jock. That's what that's the way I describe it. I didn't want, because, a lot of athletes are not well respected for their intellectual prowess or whatever. So I didn't want to be one of those guys. So I decided, I better start, paying attention to academics. And so my coach, Claire Markey, and I went on a trip, and we visited a few schools, and the only one that really gave me a scholarship was University of Washington.
And that was your mom's alma mater.
It was,
yeah.
Yes, coincidentally it was. And of course it's close, to Alaska. But we got an opportunity to play. I got an opportunity to play with some of their players on a pickup game on a Saturday afternoon or something. And that was enough to have that coach there give me a 1-year scholarship, a trial.
A full scholarship.
Yeah, full scholarship, which is pretty unusual at that time for an Alaska kid. And so I went there. It was the University of Alaska Fairbanks did offer me a full scholarship. So definitely they wanted me to come here. So, but I wanted to go outside and test the waters in the big time, and that was a Pac 8 then. Now it's Pac 12, I guess. It's one of the big D2 schools, and I found out that I wasn't really good enough for that level of play, and so I was there for 1.25 years, and my coach said I could stay there as long as I wanted with a full scholarship. I could stay the full 4 years, but he wouldn't talk me out of leaving. I told him that I wanted to go somewhere where I could play more, and he said, yeah, okay, I understand, but you can stay here if you want. I thought that was an honor that he...
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so anyway, I decided to come back to the University of Alaska Fairbanks after kind of considering some other, options maybe in the Pacific Northwest, but really I wanted to come home, I think is what it came down to, and I was comfortable coming home to play at the university here. And I'm really glad I did, because after I got here, I came back as a sophomore, and then I got into the business school for some reason. I'm not 100% sure how I got into that, but business, the idea of business as a career started to appeal to me somehow. And I got into the business school, and I just thrived, in that environment here. It was just a really transformative time for me as an individual to learn that I was capable of learning, and learning that I had an intellect that I could use, and it was fun time, and I really got into it.
Well, I want to talk just a bit both about the business school here at the time and athletics. But what's the relationship for you, Steve? I know you're still into exercise. You're still. Is there a relationship, do you think, between academics and athletics?
Well, for me, I don't know if there's, a relationship as much as there's, I just feel the need to exercise your mind and exercise your body both. I don't think it's healthy to leave one behind the other, I think they're both really important. I think they do feed off each other, and so yeah, I've always been, interested in both, at least as an adult, and I've been fortunate that my body has held up pretty well, and so yeah.
Okay. We'll get back to the business school in just a minute, but let's go to your playing with the Nanooks, because eventually you enter the history books. You're among the top 10 scorers of Nanook history. And what was it, 22-6, your winning season?
Yeah, I don't remember what our best was. That sounds about right. We had some really good players, and it was. I got to play a forward position. They called it forward. There was in my day, you had forwards, 2 forwards, and 2 guards, and 1 center.
Yeah.
And I got to play my natural position, which is a forward. And I thrived on the system that Al Svenningsson ran up here. Al's still in town. He had great success here for many, many years. And he ran a play called the passing game. It was a system. And it was a very beautiful continuity of action on the floor. And you passed the ball and you screened away, and you had a lot of back cuts, and it was just a beautiful thing to watch. In my opinion, much prettier than the one-on-one play that you often see today, particularly in the pros, where everybody just kind of plays one-on-one. But in our day, we played as a team, and Al's game was magical in that way. And we had good success with it. We were not really very tall. We usually had a relatively shorter team, but we ran the play pretty well, and we had some pretty good success.
Yeah, you think? I mean, such a winning season that year. All right, School of Management then. Now, of course, the College of Management and Security. Tell me why you thrived and who was here and what was the campus like? Because the campus at this time you're here had really mushroomed. It was doing quite well. So give us a sense about who was here and why you thrived.
Well, I think I just, I had a series of teachers that were teaching a subject that was of interest to me. And again, it was just I think it was small. The class sizes were small, so it was an opportunity to engage. I remember being in a lecture class in anthropology at University of Washington when I was a freshman. There was 500 kids in there, and you weren't going to have any interaction there, But here, it was more like a high school size class usually. So you had lots of opportunity for interaction, and I took that opportunity because I thought it was, the best way to thrive, was to sit up front and engage with the professor, and it was just what I wanted to do. I wasn't trying to be good. It was just a time when it was working for me, and so yeah, I think the class size was a big part of it. The teachers were engaging, and one of my favorite teachers was Dr. Bill Phillips. He was the dean of the school, eventually the dean of the School of Management. And he was probably the most inspiring of the teachers I had.
Mm-hmm. And Rick Soli's dad was in the school, wasn't he?
Yeah, Richard Soli, Dr. Soli. I took a couple of classes from him. He was a great teacher too. He was also inspirational.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to ask you, when you graduate from here, you didn't go immediately into banking, but you eventually went into banking. Tell us how that worked.
Okay, yeah, I had spent 9 previous summers working for my dad's construction company. And then when I graduated from college, I spent 1 more year working for my dad's construction company, and it was just 3 of us went out to the village of Wales on the tip of the Seward Peninsula. It was my friend Carl Johansson, and our foreman, a guy named Don Steele, and us 3, we went out there and we hired a couple of local guys, but we built a road and bridge in the little community of Wales so they could get to the airport. And so that we spent the whole summer out there, and it was a beautiful summer. That area is known for its bird watching. And usually it's pretty rainy weather, but we had a beautiful summer. I think it was the best summer they've ever had there, and so we had a great time. Spent about 2 or 3 months out there, and then I came back and did a little traveling because I had planned on doing that. And then I came back to Fairbanks on I think it was New Year's Eve of '77. 1977 and went to work for Bank of the North, Alaska National Bank of the North in 1978. It was one of two Fairbanks-based banks, and they had a training program, and that's why I chose that bank, because the other bank was a little more unorganized in their training program. They didn't really have ones per se. And then National Bank of Alaska had a good training program, but they were based in Anchorage, and I didn't really want to go to Anchorage. I wanted to stay in Fairbanks. So I got a chance to go to work for Bank of the North in their training program, and other people were in there too at the same time. John Ringstad, he came to work for him at the same time there, and Bart LeBon was working there too.
No kidding.
Just a couple years ahead of me, he started. He graduated here, I think, in 75, and I graduated in 77, I think. I think that's when he went there. So anyway, they had a good, structured management training program. We went from department to department, and then, after a while, we started getting to visit some other communities where the bank had branches and that sort of thing. So it was a great experience. I stayed there for 5 years, and I think I worked my way up to branch manager over here at the College Road branch. It's now a Wells Fargo office. But yeah, it was a great learning experience. I feel very fortunate to have been able to spend 5 years basically there learning about business.
Well, and of course, banks play such a critical role in a community. People invest their savings into banks, and then, of course, those banks take that money and invest it in the community through home and mortgages and through business loans. So it must have given you a new insight into your community.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting, it was interesting. You got to see a lot of different businesses. I started out in installment lending, car loans and that sort of thing. I never really worked in mortgage lending, but I did work most of my time in the business loan area. I worked for a guy named Jim Matherly, whose son is now our city mayor. And Jim was a great mentor to me at the bank. He taught me a couple of things. He said, take care of the bank, take care of your customer. That's what you got to do. You got to look out for the bank and make sure you protect the bank's interests and take care of your customer. And that was good words to live by. And so I've always remembered that.
Well, and of course, boom times then, of course, the pipelines going on. So it must have been such an interesting period to be in. It
was an interesting time. And this was just post-pipeline. When I went to work in January 78, the pipeline was completed, I think, in July of 77. So we just went into kind of a downturn after that. So it was kind of tough times in some regard. And then they started raising interest rates nationally. So I remember us we were calling loans and raising the interest rate up to 21% in one case. I was like, oh my gosh. So it was challenging times, that's for sure. Absolutely. For a lot of businesses and for the bank itself.
Well, and then at some point, you worked for Bob Bettysworth. Tell us about him, and you had kind of helped him in his campaign.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine, Kathy Nussbaumer Beislein, or Kathy Beislein Nussbaumer, I should say. She's Earl Beislein, daughter, famous University of Alaska professor and dean of the School of Mineral Industry. Anyway, she talked me into working on Bob's campaign, being his treasurer, So I was Bob's treasurer. Bob was a local contractor, a masonry contractor. He had come up after the war, had seen opportunity here, and came here and lived the rest of his life here.
Boy, your dad and he must have crossed.
Oh yeah, they were friends. I don't know if they were ever partners on anything, but they were definitely friends. And anyway, I was his treasurer in 80 and 82, and during the election of 80 and the election of 82, and then after the election of 82, he got a new assignment. He got the Budget and Audit Committee. He was chairman of the Budget and Audit Committee. and so he wanted somebody with a finance background to work for him. So he offered me a job, and I talked to my friend and mentor, Bill Gordon, who had been Governor Hammond's chief of staff, whether I should do it, kind of thinking he'd probably say, nah, stay out of politics. But instead, he encouraged me to do it. He encouraged me to do that.
What did he say?
He said, I think it would be good, Steve. I think it would be good for you, and it would be a good thing to do. And
that's great.
Yeah, I was a little surprised because politics has a reputation for
Sure does.
not being the most pleasant and not being something that a person should aspire to. But he gave me kind of the okay to do it, to get into that. And so I did go to work for Bob for a couple of years, but pretty soon after I went to work there, I decided, well, this isn't really for me. I really would rather be in business than in government. So I had made plans to work in real estate as a real estate agent, because I thought, okay, that's a way of transitioning away from the legislative job. But coincidentally, at the same time, Bob decided not to run again in '84.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of got talked into running.
In 84 for 85.
Yeah, 84, the election was in 84, and so I got talked into running, and I ran and won the election for the State House in 1984, and then I got sworn in 85 to begin that term, 2-year term in the House of Representatives.
Well, and again, really interesting times, because the bubble burst then, and there was a huge housing and banking failure rate at that time.
Yeah, that was the price of oil had plummeted. It had been up in the 30s, and it plummeted. I'm not sure where it went down to, but it was a big.
Because the Saudis really at that time flooded the market, right?
Yeah, I can't even remember what caused it at that time. Perhaps. I can't remember. I'd have to research that. But yeah, we felt the effects in Juneau. Price went down. What had been full coffers, the few years before, became Governor Sheffield was governor, and he had to reduce a budget through vetoes and through proposing smaller budgets. And so from the very beginning, when I became a freshman legislator, we were in a budget cutting mode. We had no alternative because the money wasn't there. We had to reduce spending, and so we had some targets to meet. And because I had joined the majority. There was all of us Fairbanks Republicans. We joined a Democratic coalition, and so we were. I think there were 7 of us Republicans had joined 20 or 21 Democrats, and so I did serve on the Finance Committee. I was in the majority. I had a few budgets that I was in charge of, and had to. Al Adams was he was a famous Inupiat budget chairman from Kotzebue, and he was very smart and very good at what he did, and he taught us how to reduce the budget. He just would assign reasonable budget caps for our departments, and we'd have to figure out how to work those budgets down. It was only a few percent, it wasn't devastating or anything like that, but it was a substantial reduction from the governor's request, and the whole tone was, we're not adding, we're reducing. And that's different than when the money's there, it tends to get spent. But in these years, in my
Funny
years,
how that happens.
Yeah, it's a fact of life, wherever, I'm sure, in any government. But at our time, in my time in the legislature, we were always in a budget reducing mode because the revenues were down for many years there, and so we had to live with that.
2 things come to mind as you're talking now, Stephen. I'm going to take him first. I want to ask you to kind of describe the life of a lawmaker You were in the House and Senate, very successful. And I'm guessing committees are a real key piece of being a successful or effective lawmaker. But I think a lot of people don't really appreciate the complexity of any kind of democratic political process. Can you give us a little sense about how that worked?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's very interesting. I enjoyed my time there. I'm glad I didn't stay there any longer than I did. I was there for 12 years, but it's an interesting process of coming together from people from throughout the state with differing viewpoints and differing needs and wants and perspectives, and trying to formulate necessary changes to the law. And then fundamentally, we have to write the budget each year. And I was always focused on budget. I liked that. I had a finance background, and I was more comfortable working on budgets than legislation. But I did find the legislation also quite interesting too. And as a finance member, it was where we formed the budget was at the Finance Committee, but we also oftentimes, an important piece of legislation would always take its last stop at the Finance Committee. So we always got our shot at all the important legislation, almost all, unless it was something like a criminal law or something that didn't have a finance aspect to it. But most everything has a fiscal note, and so a fiscal aspect to it. Mm-hmm. So it usually wound up in finance. So we got our shot at that too. And so we had to work on the language of a bill. And, our Alaska statutes are quite readable. A person without expert training can read the law and understand the law. And it's nice, you can read it and you can work on it. And the committee process is really good to work out problems and work out the best solutions to a problem. And it's different than, if you just have one person draft something and put it on the ballot, and have it up or down, that's too simplistic. In the legislative process, you get a lot of opinions, you get a lot of expert testimony, you get improvements, and that bill gets better as it moves through the process, always gets better as it moves through the process. And even when you get to the floor for debate on the floor, most of the work has been done in committee, but it even makes, improvements while it's on the floor sometimes. Mm-hmm. It rarely gets worse on the floor, sometimes, but most of the time it gets better. And so, yeah, it's an interesting process, very educational, very interesting.
Well, and of course, today you talked about being part in your freshman year as a legislator, being part of a coalition. Today, it seems like it's so polarized, and the rhetoric is so rancorous. Mm-hmm. Why is that, do you think? Well,
it is very different, I think. I think that cable TV, I think it started with cable TV nationally, and talk radio, and certainly social media. I think we've gone to speaking in short little blurbs or bursts.
Sound bites.
Sound bites, there you go. And the tendency is for individuals to play to the party base or to their base, whether it's party or not, and it's unfortunate. When I started there, people stayed there for the weekend and kind of lived together, and we played basketball together on teams, and we really had a collegial atmosphere even within the partisan differences that we had. There was a degree of respect among each other, and I think it was healthier. And now I think there's too much party rancor and too much, unfortunately, not enough appreciation for the other side's opinions, and so that's unfortunate. I lament that.
I know some people who like Juneau as a site for the state capitol. They've been attempts to move it, but often cite this thing that you have to interact with people, and that personal engagement seems to put a dampener on some of the more, heated kind of statements, don't you think?
Absolutely. I think it's the same, in all walks of life, how easy it is to say something you regret in an email or a text, that kind of communication that's not personal, that's not face to face. I think it results in a lot of things getting said that people wish they wouldn't have said. A miscommunication is so easy in an email or a text or a situation like that. So your point is absolutely correct, that when people are in the same room, talking to each other, looking at each other eye to eye, and feeling the nonverbal communication, no question you can come to a reasoned agreement much easier than
Through
email or any other, this is my position, kind of thing, So, yeah, I think getting together, legislators getting together face to face is definitely important, and having the appreciation for the other side. And we're not going to turn the clock back on today's media and how it's changed. It's just, we're going to have to live with it, but it would be nice to, get back to a more personal communication. I definitely think.
Well, it strikes me over time, the Fairbanks delegation, no matter which side of the aisle they're on, agreed about the university and protecting the university. And it's fallen on hard times and had some deep cuts and whatnot. But do I have that right, that you usually reached across the aisle when it came to Fairbanks or any of the university systems, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. The Fairbanks was always a flagship campus. When I was in the legislature, we viewed it collectively, our interior delegation, all members, all from whatever party, we all viewed it as that was our job to protect the university, defend and protect the university. And we did that job with pleasure and with aggressiveness at times. But yeah, it was a big deal for us. And we were good. If there was a Fairbanks issue, our Fairbanks delegation would hang together pretty well. We were small enough that we could act as a team, but large enough to be an effective presence within that larger legislature. In contrast to Anchorage, where they had so big a delegation that they tended to not be able to agree with each other. But we were small enough. We had 9 when I was there. We had was it 9 or 8 or something? We had 2 or 3 senators, depending on reapportionment, and then 5 or 6 House members. So, we could hang together pretty well, and we did. We'd put our partisan differences aside when it came to something that was important for Fairbanks, and we'd work together, just famously. Frankly.
Well, it's interesting. There's a photo of you breaking ground with Democrats and Republicans on what would become the Reichart building. Mm-hmm. And it strikes me that there were 3 UAF graduates in that lineup. Mm-hmm. So the universities played a role in lawmakers going to...
Oh, yeah. Well, of course, most, I don't know what percentage of Alaska lawmakers are University of Alaska graduates, but I'm sure it's a pretty high percentage. There was always people, and, the further you go back, the more of those people were, at this campus, because this was the only campus in the old days, but even today. And the university does enjoy good support from Anchorage. Not every legislator, holds it highly from Anchorage, but many do. Many of Anchorage legislators are very supportive of the university, and most of the other legislators that have a campus in their town are very supportive of that. Yeah. So, we have a big university system, and some of it's because of the political support that they have received for, to build the campuses that are in their communities. And so, there's good statewide support. It has been, and I would say, in the last few years, it slipped for a while there, but I think we're on the ascension again, and I think we've, the governor put more money in this year than he had the last year. He also dropped the last year of their 3-year compact to cut. That was huge. I mean, that was a $20 million savings to the university, plus he added $4 million this year over last year. So I think, he's come to the realization that the university is important to our economy and to our state generally. And that'll be viewed as one of the several, downturns in our overall fortunes for the university, but I think we're on the ascension again, as I said.
Well, you've heard the expression, love and politics. You met your wife, Linda, down in Juneau.
I did, yeah. Linda and I were both working for Bob Bettisworth. We met in, it would have been, it was January of '84, I think it was. She came to work the second year that I worked there. She came to work for Bob. And we fell in love when we were working together, and and we got married in '87, and she had 4 kids already, and so I have 4 kids. Now I have 4 of those 4 kids, plus we have 9 grandkids.
Wow.
Now. So we have a large, when we all get together, it's a pretty large group.
Well, when you leave politics, I think of you as a team on that River's Edge RV park that was so successful. Tell me how first off, how is it working with your wife on a venture? And then secondly, how did that come about?
Well, it was a happenstance in a way, because I had gotten into a real estate venture with a couple of friends down at Salcha, where we bought some property that we were going to turn into a recreational subdivision, and it just didn't work. It was, 3 people thinking they were doing something that was going to work, and it just didn't work. So trying to think about what I could do with it, and I thought, well, maybe I can make an RV park out of it. And so I thought, well, if it works there, it'll work better in Fairbanks. So I remembered that my dad and a group of his business partners owned some property down on the river. And I thought, ooh, man, I'll see if I can lease that from him with an option to buy. So I put this deal together with my dad's group to lease with an option to buy. And we built the River's Edge RV Park and started in construction in '89 and opened in '90. And it was a niche that needed filling in the market. There was a demand for, RV sites, and so it was immediately successful. And it was a great experience. We worked really hard at it. My dad helped me a lot. Linda's dad helped me. Linda's mom helped, and everybody helped.
I really think of it as a sort of a family venture.
Yeah, it was definitely, and Linda is a driving force in anything she's involved in. She's fantastic, as a business person. And so we were a good team. We worked together well, and then we kept adding on to it, over the course of 3 or 4 years there. And then the property next door came available. It had been tied up in a estate sale for a long time. And coincidentally, a friend of mine who had played high school basketball with Craig Kinda, he bought it. He was smarter than us, and he bought it out of that estate after it became available. So we bought it from Craig, paid a little more, but we bought it from him because we need, it was logical for us to own it. And so then we were going to put some cabins there, because we had been to Denali. And we had seen the cabins down at Denali. We thought, yeah, we could do that. That sounds like a good idea. And Linda was serving on the board of the Alaska Visitors Association. She became acquainted with one of the several tour companies there. And one of them kind of said, yeah, if you do that, we'd put some people there. And it was a smaller company, not one of the big ones. But so that kind of encouraged us. And then I went to the bank, my old my old mentor, Jim Matherly, I went to see him about a business loan. And he said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And so they kept giving us money, and we kept building these little cabins, and we decided we needed more because we needed to be able to handle 2 bus loads instead of just 1 bus load. So it kept growing. Well, the first phase we did 48 cabins and the restaurant building. And then we took a year off, took a breather, and then in 98, that was, we started construction in 97, and then we opened, 96 I should say, and then we opened in 97, spring of 97, and then we started construction the next year in 98 and opened the second phase in 99 with the meeting hall that we have there in the lobby building that a lot of people are familiar with. So yeah, it was a great experience. We had a lot of ups and downs.
I was going to say, tourism is
yeah,
so dependent on how this country's economy is going.
Absolutely it is. And we didn't know that at the time. We were a little oblivious to that. And we found out that, after 9/11, tourism took a big hit. And we suffered, a downturn that following year and for a few years. And then, and then we had another serious downturn during the great financial
2008.
Yeah, 2008. So 2009, 10, and 11 were pretty bad, but then it popped up pretty good in 2012, and so we recovered pretty good in 2012 and had 4 good years, and then we sold the business in 2016, and my wife pushed us to sell it. She was smart to do so, because wanted to, sell it before we had another downturn, and so she was prescient on that.
Well, okay. As we wrap up, I want to ask you about 2 of your civic or extra professional contributions. Governor Murkowski appoints you to the Permanent Fund Board. And tell me, what should we know about that, and what does a board member do on that? Okay.
Well, that was a totally interesting experience. I got to learn a lot about investments and investment management. And that's really what the Permanent Fund Corporation is charged by statute to manage the money that is contained in the permanent fund. And so you use modern portfolio theory, which is a well-established doctrine about how to manage money. It's pretty conventional. You use, usually you do stocks and bonds and real estate and some private equity and hedge fund, little bit of hedge fund stuff, but primarily stocks and bonds and real estate would be the 3 most common areas. And it's a pretty narrow responsibility, to manage the money. We don't decide how it gets spent or anything. That's a legislature's job. We don't decide how much, goes to be spent. That's the legislature. Just manage the money. And it was very interesting. It's there's only five trustees, and so it's a small group, and we have incredible management within the fund, on the fund staff, and then we hire professional consultants to help us, and professional money managers that actually make the individual decisions about which stocks to buy or which properties to buy. Neither the trustees nor our staff, our internal staff, do that sort of thing. That's mostly externally managed. So, like I say, it's very interesting. You learn a lot, and you're advised into, a pretty standard way. Now, you can have a decision, okay, we're going to do a little bit more of this type than of this type, but, it's pretty standard stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been in the news recently, of course, with the director's termination and also some concerns about its transparency of investments, but
Yeah.
but it's a public.
Well, it has to be transparent. I mean, everything, when I was there, everything was totally transparent. We had a tradition of not investing in the state because the logic was, let's be countercyclical to the state's economy. Let's not invest in the state and either subject those decisions to undue political influence or be in the same cycle with the state's economy. So there's two really reasons for not having investments in Alaska. Plus, we have aide, the Alaska Industrial and Export Authority, that can invest in the state and does. That's part of their mandate. And we have our state's, capital budget is a huge, capital injection each year. So there's money available. There's really no lack of capital, in my opinion, for good investments in Alaska. So the fact that the permanent fund invests, the billions of dollars that we have outside the state makes a lot of sense on a lot of levels. And I wouldn't think that, that it's, I'm not close to it, but I wouldn't think it was that good of an idea to vary from that personally.
And finally, for a guy who was born at the old St. Joseph Hospital, you're on the hospital board, the Community Foundation Hospital Board here, and COVID must have really been a challenge. Well, I know it was a challenge.
It was very, very much a challenge. It was a huge challenge for our doctors and our nurses and all of our staff, our medical staff, our non-medical staff. Just a huge challenge. But I think the hospital rose to the occasion in a great way, and really I could see some of the doctors were out working with the businesses, trying to help them, develop a protocol that would work for their business, and just incredible volunteerism on the part of many of these professionals, and they coped with it for 2 years, and they're still coping with it, and it's. And then, we were in a position where we had to shut a lot of the elective parts of our services down for fear that we would spread, that we would spread the disease itself within the facility. So we cut back most of our elective procedures, and that reduced our revenue. So at one point, we were fearful that we were projecting that we would lose $50 million in that year, in that first COVID year, and so we were asking for help from our federal and state and local, and we received tremendous support. It was mostly federal money that went from. Some of it came direct from the federal government, some of it came through the state, and some of it then was passed from the state to the city and the borough, and we got money from each of those three sources. We really got great support from our congressional delegation, Senator Murkowski, Senator Sullivan, Congressman Young. They were fantastic. Governor Dunleavy, right off the bat, gave us $7 million that they had discretion over, and supported us right off the bat. And we got great response from our Interior delegation, and we met with our Borough Assembly and got great support from our Borough Assembly, from our Mayor Ward, and our mayor, at the city. We got great support from Mayor Matherly there, and all the city council and the Borough Assembly, and everybody was very supportive. And so we managed to get basically all of our losses were restored from those sources. So we have gone through COVID without having a financial disaster. It could have been a financial disaster. So
Sure, could
very
have.
fortunate for that.
Do you think, reflecting back to when we were talking about the flood, do you think this adversity has forged us more tightly? Do you think, what's ahead?
Well, it's a good question. It's I don't know. there's a lot of disagreement now about,
Isn't
how to
there
handle
always?
it. How to handle things, and so I like to think we struck a decent balance. I think Governor Dunleavy did a good job of, not shutting us down, because we can't shut our economy down, but we have to deal with the reality. And we didn't know what the reality was at that time. It was a scary time for people that were I didn't have to decide, but the people that had to decide how strong a measure to take, those are serious decisions. And I think they did a pretty good job of, kind of threading the needle on it. And, and I think it's worked out fairly well.
Well, I think just finally, we're taping this days after an institution in the state, Congressman Don Young, passed away. I'm sure everybody has a Don Young story that they have, but it really indicates there are these threads throughout our history and these individuals who pass through. Is there any reflection from your time in interacting with Don Young that comes to mind?
Well, I respected his willingness to work with all parties. He was an effective congressman, spent most of his time in the minority, certainly his formative years. He was in the minority until '94, I think, when the Republicans took control. So he went 20 years as a minority member. So he had to work across the aisle and work effectively with the other party. He just had to. That was all there was to it. And he carried that forward. I heard him speak a few years ago, at a meeting, at a group. It was a fundraiser or some sort. And I hadn't heard him talk for quite a while, but I was really impressed. In this age when everything's partisan, he was talking about getting things done, working across the party lines there, and I was like, wow, that's cool,
Yeah. Well, you're kind of known for that too, so.
Well, I like to think I can work with people, so it's important. I think it's important. I mean, because everybody has their own perspective, but if you think the other guy's perspective isn't valid, that doesn't work.
That doesn't work.
No.
Steve Frank, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with us.
Well, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Fun. Appreciate it.
So does anybody have a question for Steve? Is he handsome?
It's not a question.
No.
It's a statement of fact.
Pardon.
I was all set to bring your favorite teacher here this evening.
Really?
Francine Mears.
Oh.
She just had knee replacement that just got home a week ago, and she called me about an hour before I was leaving. She said, I'm too tired, I can't make it.
Oh, wow.
Well, make sure please, she sees the,
please give her my best, okay?
She really wanted to be here.
Yeah, and while we're watching this, I'm thinking of all the people in the room whose name I should have mentioned in passing and didn't, in Nancy, of course. Nancy and I started coaching over at Monroe in the same year, fall of '79, and so we knew each other, but we weren't close, but we became quite close as co-coaches over there. We had a great time, and Nancy stayed there for the rest of her career and did incredible work over there. And I kind of moved on, did other things, but we had a wonderful time as young kids, basically, in that time. So anyway, thanks, Nancy.
My name is George Lonsbury, and I was coaching when Steve was playing ball at Lathrop. When he was a sophomore, I took him as a coach, and we went over to Yellowknife, 1970, the first Arctic games there. And he was 14 years old when we flew on Alaska Airlines jet. I don't think we showed any ID or anything. But anyway, Steve played 3 games. In the first 2 games, Steve is a sophomore. He scored 40 more points. And the Canadian government really pushed this Arctic Winter Games that year. If you remember, Steve, even Trudeau was there. But anyway, the press came up to me and wanted to know how old Steve Frank was. It's 44 points, and he kind of looked older than his age for 14. Well, he had no ID. And he also went on as a junior and a senior. His senior year, he averaged, I don't think it's ever been broken, about 33 points a game. I don't think at any level of high school basketball that's been approached. That was before the three-point shot, and he was over 55% from the field. Great athlete.
Well, let me just respond to that if I could, because of course, as you know, we were talking all about the high school basketball, and I didn't mention George's name, and I felt bad about that. I should have mentioned it along with Claire. George was our assistant coach for all those years, and has been a friend and mentor ever since. And so anyway, I'm sorry I didn't get your name into that, George. But thank you for all your support over the years. He's been a tremendous supporter all these years. One of my teachers.
Another one, yes.
Another one.
I had the good fortune of having you as a junior in my sophomore world history class. And that would be an awkward position for a lot of people. But it didn't bother you, and it didn't bother me. And I think you, I didn't even know why that happened, but you did well, and you fit in well. And looking around the room, there are a lot of people here who like you because you're a nice guy. You're an intelligent, nice guy.
Well, thank you, Don. I appreciate that. Don was it was during that time, I thought I was a senior when I took your class, we're trying to remember back. You probably have it right. But I remember it was a time when I was starting to awaken as a young adult. I'd been pretty much oblivious to everything just playing basketball. And but I remember you taught us a lot in that class, and you threw out this word and taught us about this word called alienation. And I've always remembered that, how a person could be alienated from their community or their society. And so we learned a lot in your class, and I appreciate that. So thank you. And then there's Wendy right behind you there.
Steve, I just want you to know that we started high school together.
We
It
did.
was your first year, and it was my first year teaching at Latham High School. And I tried to get you to run cross country, and you wouldn't. You were a good runner. You had a lot of natural ability.
Yep.
But both Judy and I would like to thank you for your hard work for the state. I recognized you early on as a quiet leader. You weren't out there barking all the time, but you were quietly doing your thing and leading, and we want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that. And thank you for your many years and Judy's many years of service to our students here, and many other things. Saw Wendy out volunteering the other day with that art project downtown. He was eating his pizza, so he wouldn't acknowledge me until he got done with his pizza. But anyway, he's always volunteering. He and Judy are always volunteering, doing something else. But your point about I've told my grandson Bruce how when I was his age, I couldn't get myself to run. I had the ability, but I couldn't employ the discipline as a freshman all the way up through the senior. I couldn't get myself to run. I could get myself to play basketball because that was fun. But the discipline of running is a harder thing for a young person. And those people that are runners, that takes hard discipline. Yeah. So anyway, you were really good at trying to get me to do it, but I was pretty good at resisting. No, it didn't work.
You've done a few miles in the last 20 years.
I have. As an adult, I was a runner, but I didn't have the maturity at that age. Yeah.
So you talk a lot about how important UAF has been in Fairbanks. How many ways has it sort of shaped Fairbanks? Like, a few questions. One, do you think Fairbanks would still be here as the town that we know if it were not for UAF? And what exactly has UAF, what of the many things has UAF brought to Fairbanks that has created this town?
Well, that's a really good question, a really insightful question. were it not for Fairbanks, I mean for the university, Fairbanks wouldn't be anywhere near the town that it is today. I think we can all acknowledge its impact on our economy is so huge. Its impact on our development, over these last 100 years, incredible. And really the nature of our community that the university brings, the diversity and the intellectual aspect that we have because of it. I think we're just one of the luckiest communities in the state because we have such a diverse community, and people, we're cosmopolitan. From all over the world, people come to Fairbanks. Our research is world class, literally from all over the world. And we get the benefit of that when we play on a baseball team with somebody, or go camping with somebody, or do all these things that we do as a community. We meet people from somewhere else because of our university. And we are not some little provincial farming community in the Midwest. We are a really worldwide cosmopolitan community that might look like a little farming community in the West, but we're not. So that's a really good question, really insightful. Appreciate that.
We have time for maybe one more. Does anybody have a question for Steve? Well, maybe they can grill you when we go out for refreshments.
Okay, sounds good.
Once
Thanks.
again,
I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Yeah. It was a lot of fun to answer Robert's questions. So thank you for coming. Appreciate it.